to share findings and results from statistical analysis with overall stakeholders. One thing is certain, a key ability for a Green Belt certified professional is communication. Certified Green Belts lead small improvement projects and usually work with Black Belts as project assistants, especially in large projects. They are the ones that are going to assist experts in translating numbers into business-friendly vocabulary, enabling buy-in and commitment from those that need to commit and sponsor improvement initiatives. Lean Six Sigma can benefit a lot from different project management approaches, such as the one sponsored by the PMI, the Project Management Institute, and even agile methodologies such as Scrum. You can apply the DMAIC methodology within different frameworks, but what is key is that you align Lean Six Sigma to the actual culture of the company you work for. Quality management is for life. It is not a one-time project. So you won't always be able to fully apply certain improvements, but once you start, there is no going back. We aren't done with statistics yet. The Black Belt learning path will be mostly about it, but it's a good idea to take a break from numbers and analysis to revisit some fundamental concepts of Lean Six Sigma. We've worked extensively with data and analysis, and it can be easy to get wrapped up in the numbers without remembering the business needs. The more you learn about statistical analysis, the easier it is to get caught up in the challenge of the analysis and forget that the business is relying on you for answers about its own challenges. In this module, we'll cover some obstacles you might run into when communicating your statistical findings to business employees and leaders. We'll also talk about the importance of including statistics in business presentations and some tips for integrating statistics within those presentations. We'll start our module by talking about common challenges when presenting statistical analysis, and then I'll offer you some tips for creating business-friendly presentations so you can really get support from who matters for the success of your project. Next, we'll talk about how you can better understand your target audience, and I will offer you some insights and techniques on storytelling and how you can better communicate ideas with text and images. I'll also share best practices related to presentations, as being clear and concise, and at last, we'll talk about how you can smartly use your tools when it comes to Lean Six Sigma. This course is 100% based on the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt Certification Training Manual, which content was used with permission from the Council for Six Sigma Certification. You can download the training manual for free at sixsigmacouncil.org. This is an audio and visual representation of the official Green Belt publication produced based on Pluralsight instructional design guidelines and templates. In this video, we're going to talk about the common challenges related to presenting statistical analysis. Here's the first and perhaps biggest challenge faced by Lean Six Sigma experts when delivering information from statistical analysis. Most people don't care. Truly, unless your sponsor is a Lean Six Sigma expert too, or your leadership committee is well-versed in Lean Six Sigma methods, the people you are presenting to don't care about which hypothesis test you used or what your chi-squared statistic or p-value was. That isn't to say that business leaders and others don't care about the conclusions or results of your analysis. And they certainly care about the results of the project as a whole. But you have to find a way to present your information in a way that ties in with what they care about and doesn't rely solely on statistical concepts and language. A second challenge is that general business staff and leaders are unlikely to have the same understanding of statistical analysis as a Lean Six Sigma expert does. In a presentation regarding an improvement project, the Six Sigma presenter is usually tasked with presenting data when the backup for the data might not be understood. As a Six Sigma expert, you have to be able to explain why the team chose to move in a certain direction or how you know a process has improved, and not everyone is simply going to take your word that the p-value was appropriate for the decision you made. A third challenge when presenting your analysis is that you can easily become distracted or derailed by the statistics without getting your business point across. This can happen for one or two reasons. First, your sponsor or another member of your audience is knowledgeable about Lean Six Sigma and statistical analysis. He or she might begin asking statistical questions instead of business questions. Why did you use this proportion test instead of another? How did you choose the sample size? Do you really think a beta of 0.2 is sufficient? Or should you have gone with a 0.1 beta? Some statistical questions might very well be valid. How did you choose the sample size? That might be something relevant to cover in a presentation so that the audience understands what assumptions were made by the team and what risks were considered acceptable. On the other hand, if you've already done the analysis and made decisions based on sample size and hypothesis testing, then it's really not necessary to have that conversation. One way to keep this type of derailment from occurring is to keep a sponsor with Lean Six Sigma knowledge in the loop throughout the project. That way, he or she can provide input on such things in real time if desired. The other reason you might get lost in statistics when you are supposed to be presenting business-relevant information is because your audience doesn't understand the statistics, leading to the presentation becoming a statistics lesson. It's important to walk the line between educating the audience on necessary information regarding the Lean Six Sigma process and providing an in-depth discussion of statistical analysis. For example, you probably should ensure your audience understands what standard deviation is and why it's important. But you probably don't need to explain all the types of hypothesis tests, or even in some cases that you use a hypothesis test at all. A final challenge in presenting statistical data is a tendency to include too much information or too many examples. You have a box plot, a bar graph, a pie chart, a hypothesis test, and several calculations based on probability distributions. They all look good to you. They all say a little something different about the data, but they should all go in the presentation, right? No, wrong. Too many ways of illustrating the data overwhelms the audience. It's also likely that the majority of people within the business won't see the nuances in the data that a trained Lean Six Sigma expert does, which means from their perspective, you're simply showing the same data over and over. It's not an effective use of presentation space or meeting time. In this video, I'm going to offer you tips for creating business-friendly presentations. Even with all the challenge discussed previously in our last video, you shouldn't leave statistics out of your presentation altogether. Whether you are presenting findings at a measure or analyze Tollgate review, or you are presenting for final approval on improvements, statistics are what provides your conclusions or results credibility. Incorporating your data into a presentation can be difficult, but I'm going to provide some tips for doing so in our next clips. If it's important to include statistics for credibility, but many people in your business audience are likely not to follow the intricacies of the actual analysis, what do? This is actually where some of the biggest benefits of Lean Six Sigma's statistical process control come in. If you are working in a true Lean Six Sigma environment, then you are never working only with the numbers. Remember that Lean Six Sigma is more concerned with the business and its goals and success than it is with the data and the analysis. In fact, the analysis and data is only relevant in so much that it can be used as a tool to make or measure improvements to business processes. Because of this, the Six Sigma team should already be rooted in business terms and phrases. Consider the act of drafting the problem statement, which we covered in previous videos. The problem statement combines statistical concepts with business goals and needs, and it is a good reference point for anyone presenting Lean Six Sigma information throughout and following a DMake project. If you aren't sure if something should be included in a presentation, then ask yourself, does it relate to the problem statement or a solution for the problem statement? If not, then it's probably not necessary to communicate or present in a general business environment. As you work with data and statistics, you might be surprised by how your interest in the numbers grow. While interest in the numbers can lead you to valuable discoveries and conclusions, you do need to avoid the temptation to include data or conclusions in a presentation simply because you think they are interesting or cool. In this video, I am going to share with you techniques that will help you understanding your target audience. When presenting or communicating about a Six Sigma project or statistical analysis, tailor the information to reflect your audience's level of concern and knowledge. For example, consider a Six Sigma black belt who is presenting during an improved target review meeting. The black belt is presenting to a leadership team, which includes the project sponsor. At least 2 members of the leadership team are also black belts. Perhaps one is even a master black belt. Given this scenario, the audience is both invested in the information and capable of understanding many of the statistical concepts behind the decision made by the Lean Six Sigma team during the project. That doesn't mean you should automatically include all of your data in the presentation. Your audience is also busy. But it does mean you should anticipate at least a few questions about methodology or statistical analysis, and you can incorporate a few technical terms or results into your presentation without worrying about having to explain them. When dealing with this type of audience, it's often a good idea to create a presentation appendix. You can put your analysis, data tables, and even specific Minitab results in the appendix, where they can be quickly displayed if a specific question calls for it. In situations that involve high costs or high risks, leadership teams are more likely to want to see the background analysis because they need to fully understand all assumptions and risks before making a decision on the recommended improvements. In other situations, you might be called upon to present Lean Six Sigma information or statistical findings to audiences that are less invested or who don't have any background with statistics. Examples include presenting to general management or presenting the reasons behind changes to the staff in a department impacted by a Six Sigma process improvement. When this happens, it can be helpful to rely on graphical representations of your analysis, particularly if the information you are trying to share is very apparent and on a certain type of graph. For example, a Lean Six Sigma team in a government office has been tasked with improving the production of a workflow process that involves reviewing applications for financial aid. The team has made improvements to the process and now compares the average hourly production rate of the process before the changes with the current average hourly production rate. To do so, they complete a 2-sample t-test to determine whether the new data has a higher average mean than the old data. You can see the Minitab results on your screen. Knowing what to do about hypothesis tests and p-values, you can see quickly that we reject the null hypothesis, and we accept the alternative. Yes, the mean averages of the process have changed. It is, according to our statistical analysis, a more productive process. And don't worry if you can't read the Minitab results. It's not mandatory for a course, but it exemplifies what I want to teach you right now. But imagine a C-level executive looking at the set of results we have here, produced on Minitab. Can you just copy that Minitab data into a PowerPoint slide? Probably not. Only a Lean Six Sigma or statistical analysis expert is going to be able to make that connection between p-value and real-world conclusions. Consider the graphic I'm showing you on your screen right now. This is a box plot of the same data used to create the previous 2-sample t-test in our last slide, but it provides a friendlier version of the data for most business employees. You can quickly see that the process C2 has a higher rate of production than the process C1, even if you don't know anything about box and whisper plots. It's not enough to understand how the target audience is likely to interact with data and statistical analysis. When creating a presentation about your project or statistical data, you also need to understand what the target audience wants to know and how they need to know it. High-level leadership typically wants to know whether the project was a success, how you know it was a success, what savings or gains can be expected, and how you are controlling the process to ensure the same issues don't arise again. Process owners and employees close to the process should know the results I just shared with you, though you might have to broaden discussions about costs and savings to leave out sensitive data that could be included in an executive level presentation, such as assumptions about employee pay. Process owners and employees are also likely to want to know more details about the specific changes to the process. Why were such changes implemented and how does it impact daily workflow? Where leadership might be satisfied with a high-level process map, for example, process owners want to see more granular maps. Audience members from disparate departments are likely to ask questions that make sense from their perspective, so know who will be in a tollgate or type of presentation meeting and be prepared to answer questions specific to their world. Compliance staff asks about adherence to regulations. Did the team consider regulations when making decisions? What happens when compliance required a decision that seemed opposite of where the statistical inferences led the team? Did the team calculate risks and costs associated with compliance failures, which are often greater than other process failures? You obviously can't create a presentation that answers every possible question about your process, project, or statistical analysis. The presentation would be enormous and take much too long to present. It's typically a good idea to keep a presentation under 10 to 20 minutes with plenty of time for questions, and your presentation time might be even more constrained depending on organizational business practices. So, you should always answer the biggest and most important questions about your improvements, project, or DMAIC stage in the presentation, and be prepared for other types of questions in the questions and answer session. This is where an appendix can be helpful. In this video, I'll share with you storytelling techniques to create better presentations. Use PowerPoint or another presentation program to combine your information in a way that tells a story that the audience can understand and care about. Another tip is to keep your audience and the purpose of your presentation in mind. Also, attempt to tell an overall story across your entire presentation while presenting miniature narratives on each slide. First, ask a question as the title of the slide. Create a concise question, but try to write a standalone question. The slide example doesn't do a great job of that. What changes, what process, and what hourly rates are being discussed. In the context of an entire presentation, this isn't a problem. However, you might want to pull a single slide out for an email communication or training document. And executive leaders tend to pull out one slide or graphical image to communicate information about a sponsored project. A better title for this slide might be, Did software changes to the AID application review workflow increase hourly production rates? Next, include an image that answers your question or provides additional information regarding the data or process. Pictures, graphs, and maps break up long blocks of text in a presentation, making it easier for the audience to digest. By presenting data in a variety of formats on one slide, you also capture the interest and understanding of a wider audience. Graphical representations of data often get the point across quicker and help you tell a complex data story in a small amount of time. It can be a good idea to include some basic statistical information, such as a business-friendly version of the null and alternative hypothesis. At the very least, everyone in the audience can understand that these two statements are what the team were evaluating, and only one of them can be true. Including the type of test run and the p-value is optional, but can be a good idea both for the team's own reference and for informing sponsors or others who are also knowledgeable in Lean Six Sigma. Finally, answer the question posed in the title in a short text-based conclusion. The conclusion should align with any graphical representation or statistical test data included on the slide. You should avoid presenting contradicting data and conclusions on a single slide, unless you have a specific reason for doing so and an explanation of why the contradiction is important. Consider the example on your slide, which presents a two-sample t-test information used previously in our course. The slide tells a story with the placement of information, the inclusion of a graphic, and a question and answer format. This is an easy template that can be used in a majority of Lean Six Sigma presentation slides, particularly when presenting statistical analysis or data. Not all questions require all elements of the previous example slide. Sometimes it makes sense to provide the answer in concise text. For example, you might ask, what problem is the team trying to solve? The right content for that slide would be the problem statement as written in the define phase. Sometimes, the only thing you need to include on the slide is a graph or chart like in this example. The slide asks what is causing defective orders to be sent out, and it answers the question with a Pareto chart. That's perfect. Even if someone is not familiar with the Pareto chart, it's fairly obvious given the labels and data that the issue creating the biggest number of defects is in product finishing. Someone who knows about Pareto charts could see within seconds that finishing errors and defective raw inputs account for over 60% of the errors. If you add wrong product selected, you account for 80% of the errors. Some Lean Six Sigma tools such as the Pareto chart are easy to explain to audience members who don't have a pre-existing understanding of data analysis or Lean Six Sigma. Given a minute or two of the presentation time, you could sufficiently explain how the chart we just presented answers the slide's question, and this is one reason Pareto and other bar type charts are popular in such presentations. In this video, we're going to talk about how you can and should be clear and concise when creating presentations. No matter how you are presenting your data, make sure each slide and each element on the slide is clear and concise. This means writing in active language as much as possible, avoiding long text explanation, and ensuring everything is spelled correctly and that you didn't use the wrong word by accident. When including statistics in a presentation, it can be easy to make an incorrect word choice that changes the meaning of your entire statement. Simply saying greater than when you meant less than, or decrease when you meant increase, can skew the information you are providing or make it confusing to your audience. Clarity isn't just a concern in word choice and sentence structure. You should also be concerned with how elements on your slide come together. Don't put so much information on a single slide that words or images become unintelligible to the audience. In some cases, you might need to ask a question and answer it over a series of slides. Be cognizant of the fact that a projected slide image is never as clear as the image on your computer. Because of this, you should always avoid layering light font or images over a light background, or layer dark font or images over a dark background. Don't minimize fonts to something as small as 12 point just to fit all the information. Remember, your audience could be sitting feet away or even yards away. You also don't need to include every bit of information on a slide. The slide should act as the visual reference point for the audience while you add information verbally. The text and images you add directly to the slide shouldn't be your only concern. You also need to make sure text and images within graphs are as clear and concise as possible. Now consider these two block spots. Pause the video if you want to read them. The first box plot on its own doesn't provide much information to an audience. Someone who understands box plots would simply be able to tell that two things were being charted and that the average of one was higher than the average of the other. The second box plot is the same as the first, but the title and data labels have been edited. Now, you can see that the graph provides information about the application workflow. Especially, the graph is illustrating the average production rates per hour for that workflow, and the new workflow process seems to be more productive than the old one. Creating graphical analysis that tell a small story all on their own with the help of data labels and titles is important. First, as the Lean Six Sigma presenter, labels provide cues that help you verbally explain the slide or graph. After several slides with similar-looking graphs or charts, even you can get confused about what specific data you're talking about. Second, appropriate labels on such images let you reuse the image without the context of the presentation or slide. This means you waste less time and can reuse your work when communicating about your project or data, effectively reducing muda of rework. Finally, you don't have to worry as much about someone taking your data or analysis and misinterpreting it or getting the wrong idea from it. If graphs are properly labeled, then it is harder for someone seeing the information outside of your presentation to draw the wrong conclusions. You can also add colors of data on charts in both Minitab and Excel, making it even easier for an audience to draw appropriate conclusions from the illustration. Consider the Pareto chart on your screen. This is the same Pareto chart shown earlier in this module, but in this version, the top 3 categories are presented in red. The color change emphasizes those categories, which account for 80% of the errors, making it easier for the audience to draw the conclusion that these are the issues that the team will concentrate on. Wrapping up our module, I'll tell you how you can better use your Lean Six Sigma skills and tools. A final tip for creating business-friendly presentations is don't misuse the tools, knowledge, and resources you have for creating a presentation or communicating ideas. Don't misuse PowerPoint, for example. Most audience members don't want to see a 100-slide presentation. Just because you can include it, it doesn't mean you should. Likewise, try to avoid animating every aspect of your presentation. Yes, there is a time for fade in or fly in, but the time is not every slide, bullet point, or image. Use animations sparingly, if at all, for impact about very important conclusions or elements of your presentation. For the most part, a strong Six Sigma presentation should rely on clarity and data over gimmicks and animations. Don't misuse Minitab or your other statistical analysis software. It takes mere seconds to perform certain tasks or create graphs in Minitab. Because of that, Lean Six Sigma analysts and teams tend to accumulate a lot of versions of data. Treat Minitab graphs and analysis as you do PowerPoint animations. Use them as needed, but don't use them because they are there. One good rule is no more than one graph or chart per slide or data-related question. Choose the graph or chart that you feel most powerfully or appropriately illustrates your data. There are exceptions to this rule, and you might need to include 2 charts if one chart helps explain another, or you are comparing information about data or multiple datasets. Don't misuse your data analysis skills. Misuse of data analysis can come in 2 forms. Either you make a data analysis error inadvertently, or you force an analysis to fit a desired outcome or conclusion. The first step is more of an error than a misuse. You can avoid presenting such errors to others by double-checking all conclusions and inferences and having someone else knowledgeable about Six Sigma review your analysis before you finalize a presentation. This is why many Six Sigma organizations have at least one Master Black Belt on staff. Black Belts and Green Belts can call on the Master Black Belt if they have analysis questions or simply want to confirm they are on the right track with analysis. No one is infallible, and mistakes can happen. As a Lean Six Sigma expert, however, you can never allow biases to force statistical conclusions that are unsupported by the data. And you certainly should never cloud analysis by presenting it in a way that makes it hard for your audience to see the appropriate conclusions because you want them to draw another conclusion. For example, the trick we used in our last video to highlight a certain part of the Pareto chart with color can be used inappropriately. You can draw attention to a certain part of a graph or bar chart with color, increasing the chance that the audience will conclude that the colored portion is of more relevance or more important than other data on the graph. While this is sometimes true, Lean Six Sigma teams and presenters must be careful when using such tactics. Only create a scenario when the data supports such an emphasis. Another example of creating bias in a presentation comes when you present analysis information knowing the sample size was not big enough for strong conclusions, but you don't make that known when you present information. This can result in leadership or others making decisions based on your data without understanding the risks that the conclusions might be wrong. Similarly, if you run 4 types of tests in Minitab and 3 support one conclusion while only a single test supports the conclusion the team originally wanted to present, you shouldn't present only the results of the single test. Before presenting anything, you should review each of the tests to understand why there is a difference in one. You should also ensure that the tests you are using are appropriate for the data, question, and sample size at hand. If you verify the statistics are all correct, then you usually go with the conclusion supported by the greater number of tests. Given the decision-making process is a requirement in the corporate business world, presentations are a requirement of the DMAIC process. Lean Six Sigma teams and experts are going to have to present their findings at some point, so presentation skills are something you need to work on. That being said, it is important that you never let the need for a good presentation drive any part of the process. Lean Six Sigma teams should never make decisions about data gathering, graphical analysis, process mapping, brainstorming, or any other Six Sigma function because they think it will be good or look good for the presentation. Instead, the presentation of information to the business must come after the work is done. This truth is relevant anytime you are presenting information to the business or business staff, not just when you are standing in front of a conference room with a PowerPoint behind you. For example, Black Belts often communicate with sponsors or business leaders regularly during the course of a DMAIC project. Perhaps the team provides a daily email or a weekend update to the sponsor. Whatever the mode of communication is, all of the tips in this module are relevant. That's it. I'll see you in our next module, preparing for the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt certification.